Welcome, Katherine Karayianis, to the Dish with Dina podcast. What a pleasure it is to have you on with me today.
It's so nice to meet you, Dina.
I had asked you earlier if we knew each other, and the answer was no, we did not. We've never met before. And that's what I love about what I do on these episodes is I put notifications out into the internet space, and I always say there's no such thing as coincidence. So I'm sure that whatever you have to share with us today is going to resonate with our audience, and I can't wait to learn more about you.
Lovely, I'm excited.
So let's start first with a little bit of who you are, where you're at, what you do, kind of like the elevator pitch version, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper as our conversation progresses.
You can call me Katie. I go Catherine, Katie, whatever. I currently live in Los Angeles, California. I've been here since almost like 9 months, which is kind of crazy. And I'm an ADHD coach, academic consultant, tutor, and a bunch of other things. I'm an executive functioning coach too. I do it all.
You wear many, many hats, as a lot of
I
people
wear
on this
many
podcast
hats.
do. Yeah, it feels like the ambition does not run thin in the amount of people that I've been working with and speaking to. So I'm excited to learn more about that. Can we get an origin story? You said you just moved to the West Coast. So where did it all
Yeah.
begin for you? How did you decide this profession? Share with us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So it goes all the way back to when I was a little girl. I was born and raised in the state of Maryland. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was about 8 years old. And I knew before then, I knew reading was hard. I knew school was hard. I remember very vividly sitting in the second grade class with a book upside down. Everyone was silently reading. I had my book upside down and I was just looking up to see how often everyone would flip the pages. And my eyes would just go over each line and then look up, see if anyone else turned the page, and I would flip the page. And I would be so proud of myself because I'd be like, oh my God, I got through the book before everyone else. And then my best friend tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, your book's upside down. And I was like, oh yeah, no, it's just because I'm so good at reading. I'm practicing doing it like the wrong way to make myself like even better. And I think she knew the truth.
That is a very challenging thing to be hearing at such a young age. What is that, second grade or so you said? Second or third
Yeah,
grade at
very,
that
very
point?
young. Yeah.
And I know we have a bit of age difference between the two of us, but I know for me, back when I was in school, oh, this is the late 70s, I guess at that point, you know, these diagnoses weren't necessarily available to us, or we might have been told that we were making things up, or we
Yeah.
might have gone through some evaluations and maybe misdiagnosed. Can you share with us a little bit about how you got from point A to point B and understanding
Yeah.
and recognizing that?
I know my parents said year after year, starting in middle school, Katie's having trouble reading. Katie's having trouble doing this, that. And the school just really pushed it off and said, no, she can, but she'll catch up. Get to third grade, we had to do book talk. So we had to read a book independently by ourselves and then share what it was about. And I took the chapter book with pictures in it. And I decided to base it off of the pictures, use my great imagination to base it off the pictures. And so my mom went in for a parent teacher meeting, and the teacher said, Katie's so creative. She's so good at all these things. Look at her. And my mom asked the teacher, have you read this book? And the teacher's like, no. She's like, well, I have. And Katie's book talk is wrong. She based it off the pictures. She can't read. So then, I'm in fourth grade or third grade, can't read. And there it started my whole journey. So my parents took me to get diagnosed privately because the school wouldn't diagnose me. My parents hired a phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal tutor who I worked with until I graduated high school, and she taught me how to read. And she really just caught me up to grade level. And then my parents, my motivation, I wanted to be better. So it just pushed me and I got curious about the brain, and I was like, oh my God, I want to know why people's brains are different, because I look like everyone else, but my brain doesn't work the same way everyone else's does. So, I got interested in psychology. I went to the University of Maryland, College Park, like my parents, and I studied psychology and neuroscience, and then immediately got into a PhD program, wanted to go off, do psychological research science, and then had a little bit of a career change because I realized it'd be really cool to have my PhD and it'd be really cool to be a researcher and do these things, but I wanted to work more with people. I wanted to work with the the little Katies and the Georges and the Sharons, my parents. And I wanted to work with other families and help them realize that ADHD doesn't have to be the biggest detriment to your life. It can be a superpower if you know how to use it.
I think navigating this, I guess, what are we calling it? Is it a condition? Is it a diagnosis? I know it's on more of a diagnosis on the DSM side of things, I think, and the
Yeah,
mental health world than it is a clinical diagnosis. But I
yeah.
think, especially jumping forward now with the world in which we live, and granted, there are definitely, pros and cons to where social media plays a role in the internet, but I feel like there's a lot more destigmatizing, maybe, slash normalizing of people with different brains and different ways of how they interact with the world around them. And I
Yeah,
feel if I had that back in the day, I might have felt a little bit more supported. And I'm sure people who are also dealing with whatever end of the spectrum that they might be. And of course,
yeah,
correct me in my language too if I'm saying anything incorrect, but I feel like that could have been very useful for them. Now it feels like there's so much information, there's so many resources, and there's a whole community out there. So
yeah.
while we're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit, talk us through a little bit about how today in the life of someone with ADHD might be able to navigate things. Like, what exactly is it that you're doing
Yeah.
to coach them? What are some of the main concerns that you might be assessing or evaluating when you're working with them? And tell us a little bit about, like, maybe a typical week in the life of you these days.
I guess I'll start off with a typical day in the life of me. I mostly am here, mostly working from my desk or my patio or my pool. I do a lot of my work online. I get on a lot of calls with parents and I get on calls with their kids. And I also wanted to mention, you going back and there is a lot more destigmatization and a lot more resources out there about ADHD. I'd say there's a lot of also misinformation out there. So I think one of the perks of social media is you see different perspectives of what ADHD is. But then you see a lot of putting like a shiny mirror on it or like putting a shiny sparkle on it. It's like glamorizing ADHD
Mhm.
and sometimes we forget things. Whoopsie. But it's also about getting to the airport. This has never happened to me, but this is very ADHD, getting to the airport. You have everything packed and you're going on an international trip and you forget your passport, the one thing you needed to get on that plane. And so yeah, sometimes it can be, whoopsie, I left the house without my keys and now I can't, get back into my gate. But it can also be, I had a job interview today and I overslept. Or, I didn't pay my rent on time because I forgot to set up auto pay. I think for adults, it's a lot less stigmatizing. But I think for kids, it's still very, very stigmatizing. Bless his soul. Like one kid, I was working with him for a while and I was going to an IEP meeting with his parents and he just told his mom, I heard him in earshot. He said, Mom, just please tell Katie to tell my teachers take me out of pull out. I don't want to be pulled out anymore. I don't like it when other kids, and I really felt for him because that's what I told my parents. Please don't make me go with Mrs. Salzman. Please don't make me go with her because other kids stare at me and because of the whole way our school systems are built, if they have only one teacher that can do pull out and you have kids with a ADHD, it's a wide variety. You can have someone who's bouncing off the walls over here and someone like me who's just in La La Land all day. And putting all those kids together, especially when one's having a meltdown and it's causing the other four to kind of freak out, it's not the best scenario. So there's lots of issues with that. No, and a day in a life for me is I get on phone calls with parents, and I have a lot of parents cry, either when they're describing what the struggles are for their kids, and a lot of times it has to do with they're having trouble making friends at camp, or they got kicked out of this camp because they can't be nice to other kids, or their kids' friends are starting to say really, really hurtful and mean things to them when they're asking them to play. And then I get tears at the end when I give them, suggestions and solutions, and they're like, this is going to do wonders. I don't want to keep punishing my kid, but if I do this, it just light bulbs go off. So it's really, really rewarding. I love what I do. I love working with parents and helping them realize that no, your kid can have friends. Your kid can do all of these things. And if your kid wants to, they can live on their own. And they don't have, it doesn't have to be this big horrible thing if we address it.
And know, like you were saying too, provide them with the path of managing, just like anything, any life experiences, responsibilities, tasks, assignments, things that might feel a little bit overwhelming. Would you mind going
Yeah.
back for a sec and defining a few
Hmm.
things for our audience and for me too?
Yeah.
IEP, I've looked that up, but I
Oh,
forget what it
sure.
stands for.
It's an individualized education plan. So it also goes along with 504. 504, it's just someone in school that gets accommodations. So if they need extra time. IEP, it's the accommodations plus goals and objectives. So if your kid has trouble advocating for themselves or they have trouble using stress management strategies in class, that's where the teacher's also responsible for helping helping the kid give them cues to help them use these strategies and practice them in real life.
Right, because you're also training the people in the room on how to understand what they're seeing maybe for the first time ever, or how they can help support the person, the student that's in the room. Now, you mentioned also
Mhm.
pull out. So is that in the sense of you're taking the student or the child out of the classroom setting into a special resource room?
That's when a few kids, yeah, they get taken out, they get pulled. So it's literally they get pulled out of their regular classroom. It's in front of all the other kids. So typically a teacher will come in and they'll say, okay, Mrs. Salzman's kids, go. Or she'll say, Peter, Ryan, Katie, and Jamie, come on, let's go.
Does
And they
that make
take them to a special room to typically they work on, it's called resource.
And that's to strengthen skills or review other educational materials as well, just to make sure that the students are grasping it as
Fill in
whatever.
educational gaps and
Okay.
work on those IEP goals and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where the tricky thing comes in. I mean, being a kid, on its own is enough of sometimes a stressful time of life, but you
Right.
add into it some ignorance, you add into it some misunderstanding, you add into it bullying capabilities that some children feel the need to implement as well. And now you're
Yeah.
putting somebody who's already trying to navigate a world around them, and then they have to also deal with that nonsense too. So
Yeah.
how old, or how young, I guess I should ask too, how young are the children that you're specifically working with? Like how early in the ages of whether they're in daycare or kindergarten or
Yeah.
elementary school or high school? Like tell me a little bit about some of the shifts you might see too, depending on the age ranges that you work with.
I work with kids, I think, as young as 5. I know I have a couple of 5-year-olds. And I work with my oldest is 19, something somewhere like that. Yeah. So I tend to work with all the way up to college level or even, adult learners. I think the major thing for kids with ADHD where they have a lot of trouble is going through those big transitions. So elementary school to middle school or middle school to high school to, college or post graduation, whatever the transition is. I have some kids that are also in gap years. And well, they're not kids anymore, they're adults. I have some adults that are in their gap years. Those are when kids really start to struggle. It's going from those big transitions. So, say going from elementary school to middle school. One big transition that happens is instead of learning to read, you're starting to read to learn. And so if you have difficulty regulating your attention or, initiating a task initiation is a big issue for kids with ADHD. You might really struggle in middle school or even say, middle school kids have lockers. They're responsible from going from class to class and responsible for having all of their materials. That's a lot of executive functioning, especially for a kid with ADHD, because kids with ADHD or people with ADHD in general, our brains are about 3 years younger than our chronological age. So I am 27. And if I was typically developing, my brain would be fully formed or about fully formed. My brain will not be fully formed until I'm 30 years old. But so you take a fifth grader who's 10, they might be operating more like a 7-year-old. And that's something that we also forget.
And yet still in the environment of same chronologically aged
Yeah.
other children. So this is just for anybody out there who's heard other conversations I've had on this podcast. I used to work in prenatal counseling, and I taught life cycle nutrition. We talk about the cycle changes and stages. And when you're talking about children who are born early term, this is what we call correcting of age. Like if somebody is born 8 weeks prior, you're not comparing them on the growth chart to someone who has been born at full term of, 40 weeks or
Yeah.
38 weeks and so on. But in the case of what you're talking about, they're still integrating into potentially the same grade level and then having to
Hmm.
kind of like figure out how to course correct or catch up in that sense. And like you said,
Yep.
it can be done if they have additional resources available to them, or maybe some extra classes or tutors if they need that. But I can
Yeah.
definitely see how that can be quite challenging no matter what your age is when you're working in that, especially 3 years. 3 years is like a pretty big gap from, X grade to the next grade.
Think
Thank you.
about middle school, or high school when you have that big gap, those big transitions, you're transitioning from being a little kid to a middle kid, or even like, especially, in high school. And that's where you tend to see a lot of more problematic behaviors. So kids like peer pressure. Peer pressure is hard for anyone, but then add in a kid for ADHD who already feels left out, who feels isolated, who feels othered. And then you bring in that other element of, oh, join us and do XYZ, it's going to be a lot harder for them to say no, especially if they feel othered.
I want to talk a little bit too, as I'm writing things down, the support system. So you have the teacher
Mhm.
who's in class, you might have some of the resource professionals there as well. And then, like you said, you have the parents or the caregivers or the guardians, whoever's helping these children grow in the home base.
Yeah.
So, how do you make that communication happen? Is it about also connecting parents to teachers and you kind of like being on call to navigate or moderate any of those discussions?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely be involved in those discussions, and I definitely am involved in those discussions. It's a lot of communication with, I think truly it needs to be communication with the parent and the teacher, regardless if there's an IEP or whatever. I think a lot of times teachers, they teach for a reason. They're teachers because they want to help kids. They want to help students. They want them to succeed. And I think it's really hard for teachers when, say, you have a kid who's, say, with ADHD and they're not turning in their assignments. Or my my partner always told me in elementary school, or not in elementary school, in high school when he was about to graduate, he did all of his final projects, but then just didn't turn them in because he knew he would end up getting the same grade. And so, he kind of did that math and he was like, well, I did it because I wanted to do it, but I didn't want to turn it in because I didn't care to. And so sometimes when you have those situations, you have teachers that say, oh, well, if you turn it in at the end of the year, you'll still get full credit. And I understand why they're doing that because they want, it'll hurt the kid's GPA and say if it's in high school, oh, they're getting ready for college. But you're not setting the kid up for success. And I'll tell you why. What happens if, say, that same kid has a job and he has to do all this paperwork and it's due on Friday. He doesn't turn it in on Friday. Comes Monday, boss is probably going to be kind of upset. And if that paperwork was super important, that kid might end up getting fired. And so would you rather them suffer the natural consequences when it doesn't really matter, when it's less of a practice, or do you want to, let them fail in the real world?
I appreciate the insight in that because flash forward, I am an adjunct lecturer at one of the colleges here in New York City, and I am working with people who request and require accommodations. I work with the Office of Student Disabilities, we work with tutors, evaluators, etc. And I do the best I can to make sure we are able to work within whatever people need, whether it's extra time on a test or whatever. But I appreciate
Yeah.
that insight because I definitely understand it's not about me being comfortable and just being like, oh, I'll just make it easy for everyone so I don't have to worry about tying up loose ends at the end of the semester, but
Yeah.
setting them up for success for their future because not everything might be so accommodating. And I really appreciate that insight. Maybe you don't necessarily have something that is like generalizable, as nothing I'm sure is. There's never one size
Yeah.
fits all with anything. But if there had to be some tactics that you see being implemented most frequently. I'm thinking in my brain when we work with people with disordered eating habits or people struggling with managing whatever they need to do for their health and conditions and stuff that they've been recently
Hmm.
diagnosed with. It's about the small, small, small steps. And people don't love being patient. That's number one. And the second
Yeah.
thing is also consistency with routine, of kind of getting in the habit of doing the same thing over and over again until you feel like you've progressed in some way before you add in another thing. But in the case of, I think what you're talking about too, when there is, there's time is the essence, we're moving from class to class, this is a test that's going to be happening, is that realistic. So share with us a little bit about maybe some of those tactics or things that you kind of use as an assessment or an approach when you're working with people who are trying to figure out how to navigate through all of this.
I like to get into the minds of the people I work with. I love it when the parents and the kids they tell me scenarios. So like why are they I need to know like why are they not turning it in? Is it because it's the last period of the day and they'd rather go home instead of turn it in? Is it at the beginning of the day when they get to school and oh they see friends and then they forget to go turn that assignment in? Like what is it? Or is it anxiety? I need to know kind of what is going on, why there's that deterrence, because that's going to determine how I approach the situation. I was also a community college professor. You want to still be a human and realize that, yeah, stuff comes up. But then there's also some kids who, for whatever reason, and I think it's being honest with students, if this is not your priority, then maybe this is not the right time for this class. And I think that's also something that professors can help their students like be honest with themselves, you know. And I know it's a lot harder on the grander scale where I used to be a TA at UCI where I did have 500 student lecture halls. It's a lot when you have a lot of kids like that. But in a class of like 30 or 40, you can take the time and help your students instead of just giving them extension after extension after extension. Have a conversation and ask them what's going on and is this the right time to be taking this course or do you need to handle something else in your life? Because that's how the real life works. You know, if and it's all about modeling for them and showing them how to deal with realistic situations. Say you have family stuff going on and you need to take a step back from work. If you just don't show up to work, your boss is probably going to fire you. But if you tell your boss, hey, like I need to take some time off because I'm dealing with family situations, probably going to be more receptive to you taking time off instead of just going AWOL.
Right, that communication, have a discussion with somebody and saying,
Mhm.
let's actually catch this before it progresses into something that you might not be able to recover from. So
Yeah.
maybe you withdraw from the class before the
Hmm.
tuition, reimbursement or whatever the tuition
Yeah,
refund
yeah, yeah.
is available to you and really
Before you get like a bad grade on your, especially if you're in
midterm.
community college and
Mhm.
looking to transfer,
Yeah. Exactly. The question too about prioritization. So this is something in our field we try to meet people where they're at, obviously, and we try to be
Yeah.
very conscientious too about what the external factors might be available to them. So how we how we help people implement and then kind of like, okay, you're on your own now. So are there checkpoints with you? Do you provide them with goals and things of like, this is where you should be at by this stage, or this is the three things that you should have been implementing to kind of, again, get a better feel of progressing through that consistency, through that routine, through whatever it is that you need to go on. And I ask this because sometimes, with me, when I'm working with people in their meal plans or we're trying to get them to take a little bit more control over general habits, it's a lot of, I didn't have the time, I didn't do it, or something happened and the wrench got thrown into my plan. And I never look at anything like that as excuses, just as reasons to figure out, like you just said, maybe now's
Mhm.
not the right time to, or maybe we took too big of a chunk out of that. So, where might be the milestones? Like, how could you help somebody prioritize something or at least execute what you want them to do when you're not like moving in with them and, guiding the rest of their way when they're at home?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm really happy you asked that question because ADHD coaching, it's all about the client. And so I've been kind of talking about kind of the variety of things that I do, but in for ADHD coaching in particular, it doesn't matter what I want. It is all about what the client wants. And that's why I love ADHD coaching because I could listen to you all day and night, but the truth is, I will never be the expert on you. You will always be the expert on you. And I can listen and give you all the advice I want, but with people with ADHD, they don't tend to like other people telling them what to do. So you think of a 12-year-old kid with ADHD and mom's telling them to pick up their clothes. Do you think they're going to want to pick up their clothes? No. But if they want to make a change, and people who come to ADHD coaching, they have to be ready to make a change. They have to want it. If they're ready to make a change and they come up with suggestions, I ask them like evocative questions. So I ask them, how are you going to hold yourself accountable with turning in your assignments on time? If they say, well, I really want to turn in my assignments on time, but I just can't do it. Okay, well, why is that important for you? Why now? You've been in school for how many years? Why is it so important now? and getting them to understand the importance of making that change and also having them go through that trial and error. I mean, during the session, if they say, well, I'm not going to do anything and I'm just going to see how it goes, well, I might ask them, and what do you think will happen if you do that? Let's future think to a week from now. Do you think you're going to turn in your assignment if you do nothing? And so it's all about asking evocative questions to get the client to pull out, things that they want to use. So if the client's a visual person, I can tell them, or an auditory learner, I can tell them all day long, write a list, write a list, write a list, set a reminder, set a reminder, set a reminder. But at the end of the day, if those things aren't going to work, it doesn't matter what I think.
And that's why it's so important to have that mutually beneficial conversation, right? Like you have the guiding questions, they already have some of the answers that they can provide, and you're there to also
Yeah.
navigate and support. And that sounds a lot like what we do as well with, I mentioned earlier about the meal planning, which is one of my
Yeah.
biggest pet peeves that people ask for it. I'm like, you're never going to implement it. Like you're going to ask me for it, but you're never going to follow it. The whole point
Right.
is like you just said, ask the why. Like, what is it that there's time constraints? Is it that there's financial things? Is it that you're not a great cook?
Is it that you have neurodivergent children and they only eat a handful of meals?
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, I wanted to ask you about that too, because I know in some of the information you had sent me, we're also looking at lifestyle habits too. So yes, there's the
Mhm.
academic part, and you're also thinking, future of career and professions and independence. So
Yeah, yeah,
what aspects are also included in what you're talking to your clients, your coaching clients with about lifestyle habits, about hygiene, about sleep, about stress management, about
yeah.
food, nutrition, physical activity, movement, etc. What kind of conversations do you have with them about those things and how that also helps support with whatever they're doing in their academic and professional journeys?
Some ADHD coaching clients will come to me and say, I need a plan to work out. So we'll talk about like the importance about that and why they want to do that and how they can incorporate that into their life. Because I know I know as a person with ADHD, exercise and nutrition and sleep, all of these things are hugely important. And these things also get left behind. For people with ADHD, again, it's just exacerbated because just kind of the nature of how we work. And so sometimes they'll come to me and say, I need help fixing my sleep, or say it like explicitly. But then I have other adults that say, I just need better management of my time. And so I say, okay, well, what does that look like? And they're like, I want to go to bed and wake up so that I can get to work on time and feel good at work. But then I, get home and I'm just playing video games for hours and hours and hours, just mindlessly. And then it's hard for me to get to sleep. And then I have those conversations about, okay, well, do you know that blue light before going to bed and also like the cognitively demanding if you're, say, playing this person, it was like playing like Call of Duty or something, which is, if you've ever seen someone play it, it's really cognitively demanding because your eyes are going everywhere. There's stuff shooting at you, there's stuff vibrating, there's a lot of stuff going on. And so it's not just the blue light, but it's also the rigorous physical activity. Sometimes you're also like on the headset talking to someone at the same time. So you've also got that component going. Your body's getting really revved up and then trying to go to bed right after that. Yeah, sometimes it's specifically talking about these things or coming to me asking about these things. And sometimes it's me reminding them, like, hey, do you have a nighttime routine? Is there an hour before bed that you're not on screens, that you're doing stuff to prepare your body to go to bed? Like, brushing your teeth, washing your face, maybe reading a book, or doing something that's not getting you so revved up.
I appreciate that. I feel like a lot of the conversations that we've had in the past episodes too, and this is like one of those recurring themes, is about setting boundaries with ourselves, setting boundaries with others, and also implementing something that allows us just to kind of quiet down because there's so much
Mhm.
already going on at any given moment, especially when, everything is at your hand that you could easily access information, news, social media stuff. It's just coming at you far too often and far too quickly. The interconnectedness. I mean, that's your background in social right? Ecology
Yeah, yeah.
and the environment around us. And I think a lot of times, well, especially I'm in the New York City, this is a big area where there's tall buildings and a lot of hectic vibe going on, and just kind of
Yeah.
to steal away a few moments of time of parking yourself in a community garden or venturing out and taking a walk in the neighborhood. Or I have kind of a water front that I have near in our neighborhood too, that I could stand and just be quiet for a second. So allowing those times for reflection and
Yes.
quieting the mind, I think, is kind of important too. I don't know exactly if that appeals or applies to everyone. Maybe journaling is an option and they'd rather be inside,
Mhm.
whatever it is, up to them. So I really appreciate that too. Thank you, Katie.
People with ADHD, we tend to forget how important these things are. So getting 8 hours of sleep, getting, if you're an adult, if you're a kid, different guidelines. But, getting 8 hours of sleep, eating lunch with a friend or eating lunch by yourself instead of eating lunch with an iPad or a TV. And like, I'm not perfect. I struggle with these things too, even though like I studied sleep. I know these things. I really, really do. But, then I still get caught in sometimes I'm on my phone. I like to shop at night, before I go to bed. That's my, it's not video games, but shopping at night. Yeah, that's my thing. And it's sometimes really hard to break that habit. But I've noticed when I take those breaks for myself and take a deep breath, when I'm able to sit and reflect and not be in this pent up wound up little mess, if I'm able to breathe and just look at it logically, I can say, okay, I know I like to have a little bit of TV during the day. So maybe I can do that after dinner for a little bit while I puzzle. Maybe during the day, I should eat lunch outside with the birds just to get, some sunshine.
Mix it up a little bit. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Katie, I wanted to ask you too, in however you feel like you want to implement this question, is there anything as far as hot topics, current trends, things that seem to be kind of on repeat currently that you're noticing that you're either very excited about discussing or you would like to clarify or dispel?
Ugh, okay, so this really, really bothers me. I see a lot, and I knew it was going to come up this year because RFK Jr. loves to, talk about how vaccines are bad and how the rates in autism and ADHD cases are rising. And I just really wanted to come out and say, it's all crap. I do think there are stuff in our food. There's stuff in our food that shouldn't be in our food. That's obvious. But I think to blatantly say that rates of autism and ADHD are rising because of external factors is so, so ignorant and so, so false. Yes, it has something to do with it. It's a factor. It's not the whole factor. I just think, especially when scientists after scientists after scientists and people who are on his committee don't have doctorates or medical degrees or probably haven't even read a lot of the stuff. I just think it's absolutely absurd to think that outside factors are the only reason why these rates are rising when over the past 30 years, awareness has gone up astronomically. When we first started assessing kids, when we first started examining kids with ADHD, it was called like something like hyperactive, like fidget syndrome or something like that. And we were only diagnosing boys. And then we realized, oh, girls can also have this. And then we realized, oh, girls can have this, but it might look different. And oh, some boys are like this, and they also look different. And oh, wait, adults can have ADHD? What? And even senior citizens? And then you go on the autism side, and it's the same thing. But I think just dispelling the myth that also it's something we talked about in grad school for so long. When do kids start getting vaccines? It's around 18 months. When can you readily diagnose autism? It's about 2 years old. Graphs will show this. When you start administering vaccines around the same time as kids are getting diagnosed with autism, of course that's going to look like a direct correlation. Of course it is. So it's just looking at it with a critical eye and just run your information through your supported, trusted network because a lot of science nowadays is getting really muddied and it makes me really sad as a researcher. It makes me really sad.
I 100% agree with you. I have had conversations leading up to this year as to what to expect, and on our end too, in the nutrition world, but also health sciences in general, it's applicable. I really very much appreciate your candor and your
Yeah.
professional take on this because just like you said, for anybody out there who doesn't understand what we're talking about, correlation doesn't equal causation. Just right. There's actually also, I remember seeing a graph about left-handedness. Like back in the
Mm,
day, people thought you shouldn't write with your left hand, so they would force children to switch hands and become only right hand. Then that alleviated. Now all of a sudden, rate of left-handed people went up, and it's like, yeah, well, duh, because there's awareness around it, or we're
yeah.
changing the approach about it. But just because something exists in the same timeline, so for anyone listening to this, if you didn't hear some of the definitions from previous episodes, just because something exists in the same timeline doesn't mean that this equals that or this has caused that. But I will also say, like I've said in my classes when I'm talking to my students and with my patients as well, I understand that sometimes people, when they are navigating a diagnosis, get very scared,
Yeah.
frustrated, concerned, and there's like the distrust, mistrust, and conflicting information. And even some healthcare providers or healthcare professionals or wellness influencers in the internet space are giving you all this different information, and maybe they're either not savvy enough or they're not looking at patient-centered care of lived experiences and really looking at that nuanced approach that we really try
Hmm.
so hard to take into consideration. And I can understand why people either believe what they want to believe or they get very confused about what to believe. So I
Right.
get, but I don't think you should tap into that. I don't think we should be tapping into that and fear mongering in that way because there's
I
no
don't think
real,
so.
yeah.
But another issue with that is it's social media. It's when you're on social media and when you're on the news, our phones are really good at sending us, and our technology is really good at sending us information that we are going to be receptive to. So if you are more receptive to more liberal ideas and more your news, that's going to be targeted towards you. And even Spotify, like, the podcasts I listen to, like I would love to say that I get a diverse view of things, but I get a very limited view because that's just how the world works. And it's a big issue with media in general. I think the way we use media has to change. I've felt that way for a long time. Reporters and media have to change.
And I will even say, even from back in the day when people were shopping on Amazon, oh, if you like this book, you might like that book. And now I'm also
Hmm.
noticing my mom and I, we share a Netflix account, and I have my own profile, and she has hers, and she'll get in the habit of watching certain soap opera things or long form shows and television series from outside of the country. So she'll have like a Turkish show on, and then she'll
Hmm.
have a Spanish show on, and all it will give her is the same kind of thing. So, yeah, it's feeding into that algorithm, and you become
Yeah.
very closed in on the
Yeah.
opportunities or experiences that are offered to you because the media world or the technological world thinks it knows what you want and it's not offering
Hmm.
up anything else. So
Hmm.
that is a really, really big deal. And I appreciate you bringing that up too, Katie, because you have like just with my Instagram feed, I have to actively go into my following section as an analogy. I'm getting to a point here. I have to actively go into my following section to
Hmm.
see all the things I want to see versus
Yeah.
the things that are automatically shoved in my face because I hit one thing once and all of a sudden it's, the same kind of video over and over again.
Hmm.
And when it's like cats, I'm fine. But when it's like angry people online, I'm not fine with that. It's just, a
Yeah.
blatant attack on my psyche and my mental health. And I don't love that. So
Right.
thank you for sharing that and for again for providing your stance on and your
Yeah.
perspective on that. Very much appreciate it. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to share as far as final words of wisdom or anything else that I might not have asked you about?
There's one strategy that I absolutely love for ADHD. It helps me stay accountable. It helps me get my work done. It helps me initiate tasks, and it gives me that social pleasure. So, have you ever heard of body doubling?
I have, and I love it. Yes. So explain to our audience what it is.
Okay, so body doubling, it's working with someone. You're working on something independently, they're working on something independently, and you're doing it in front of each other to hold each other accountable. So, it's very, very powerful for people with ADHD. It's something that I work with a company. It's called Neurodivergent Out Loud, ND Out Loud. And we have a program, it's called ND Hive, that lets you body double all day, every day, continuously. And I'm on it right now. I'm here with my wonderful friends on my iPad, and I don't know what I would do without it. I use it most of the time, but it also helps me as an entrepreneur working from home. I see some of my clients in person, but I mostly see clients online, and I don't see the people that I work with in person because we're all over the country. Being able to, again, see my coworkers or being able to see like they're there, they're working on their things, it just helps me, it helps me stay off Netflix. And it just feels like I'm working in an office, but without all of that extra noise, not being in my environment. It just helps me stay focused and get my things done. So I think if anyone is interested in wanting to learn more about ND Hive, I think, and learn more about body doubling and how awesome it is, we offer it for $20 a month, which is the cheapest out there. And we also offer quiet body doubling and chatty body doubling, which I think is awesome. So if you want like a little extra noise, or if you want to be able to bounce ideas off of others, go in chatty body doubling. Or if you like complete silence like me, then don't.
Right, it's kind of a more formalized study group, like in the sense of you're working with each
Yes.
other. You don't necessarily have to ask each other questions, but you're like, let's just carve out some focus time. And I love what you were saying too, that it's also for entrepreneurs as well. If you're, this has come up
Hmm.
quite a lot in recent interviews as well. A lot of us work in virtual spaces. We never see, we don't have coworkers. And so it can
Yeah.
become quite lonely. And I think also after, even after the restrictions of COVID had lifted, there's this thing about the lack or loss of third spaces, of places that you would go to
Yeah.
hang out or do other things. And so, now we're starting to get back into maybe coffee shops or libraries or trying to get more engaged in social activities. So I absolutely love that. I love how productive it feels where it's like I'm going to commit to a certain amount of time to get this done. And also to have another person in the space that you can look up to and just be like, you good? We're good. We're working on we're working on the things we said.
Yeah.
I love, love, love that. I'm definitely going to link to that as well, Katie. So this brings me to my final two-part question that I ask all of my guests at the end of our interviews, which is what is on your plate today? So after we disconnect, Katie, what is the next thing that you're working on, whether it's professionally or otherwise? And then what is the next meal that you will be eating?
Oh, okay. So, well, I'll answer that first. My next meal is going to be lunch. It is a sandwich. I'm very excited. It's going to be a nice turkey sandwich. Got my turkey carved from the deli, and I am so excited for that sandwich. And today's actually very exciting. I need to call tech support to help me with finishing up this last piece that I have. Instagram's been down for the past 2 weeks for me, so I haven't been able to really work on it, but I have a program coming out. It's how to study, it's teaching kids how to study in honors and college level courses. It is a 14-minute recording, and I can teach you how to get ready to learn how to study in honors and college level courses in less than 30 minutes. So that program is $20. My focus is just helping students and families achieve their academic and personal success. So that's what all of my programs are tailored for. So I'll be working on more like that.
This is so exciting. I didn't ask you
Yeah.
this yet because this comes on this usually comes before my final two questions, but what is the future looking like for you?
I'm the founder of KDHD Coaching. The future, it's growing really, really fast, which is really, really cool. I feel like every time I log on to my calendar, I see new consultations there with different students, and really just growing my company, getting ready for our ND Out Loud. We have our first conference. Well, it's our second conference. It's a Disney conference for neurodivergent individuals. So we're getting ready for that. I'll be a speaker. So I'm going to be a paid speaker.
Katie, I so appreciate getting to know you. I really love all of the information that you shared with us. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are out there curious about what it is that you do and how you can support them. And also just the various amount of talking points and takeaways that you shared with us today too. So thank you so much for being on here with me today.
Course. My pleasure, Dina.